NEETs, a funny little word that now nearly everybody knows. At the moment, describing the not in employment, education or training, there are nearly 1 million 16 to 24-year-olds in Britain. Obviously that number's grown hugely over 2008, 2009 with the impact of the recession, but what we also know is that it remained at around 10% of the cohort for a good decade before that.
Yes, I mean one of the problems with the category NEET is that it's a residual category. It tells us who they aren't, that they're not in education, they're not in training, they're not in employment, but it doesn't tell us very much about who they are. So in order to improve policy, we need to know more, have a more targeted approach and have a clearer definition of the groups we're dealing with.
Exactly, and we found very much through our research that you can separate out far more effectively the different sets of needs from this huge cohort. You know, to quote one of our interviewees, there's a huge gulf of difference between the gap year student in Peru who is waiting to go into university and the kid from Hackney who hasn't been in full-time education and has been truanting since the age of 13 or 14.
I think at its best it might help us to focus better on young people and the best path for them, and might act as an incentive on policymakers to do so. I think the dangers are twofold. One is that we increase the number of truants. We already have young people before the age of 16 who are truanting and who have basically left the education system. So are we really going to re-engage those young people by increasing their participation age to 18? The other danger, and I think this is perhaps even a more significant danger, is we end up warehousing those young people. They're disengaged already, they're not participating in reality, they're just sitting there, and they'll do that for another couple of years, and then when they leave at 18 they won't have decided what they're going to do and they'll become unemployed, and we're just pushing these problems further downstream. One more radical option would be to say, well, at the age of 16 you have an entitlement to 2 more years of education, and rather saying you have to do it by the age of 18, you can take that training at a time which is best for you, once you know what you want to do, once you've got on your feet.
And one other thing that has been picked up on in recent research, and which we try and explore in this report, is the issue around young people choosing jobs without training. Jobs without training isn't necessarily a dead end in all cases. It can lead on to good careers, people develop the confidence, the employability skills at work. So if you take away those 16 and 17-year-olds, of which there are many thousands currently who choose to go straight into a job, and tell them that option isn't possible anymore, you'll need to stay in more full-time education and training, are we then going to see a big lump of people who weren't classified as NEET currently now falling into that cohort because they want to go and work, they don't want to stay in full-time education or training?
The evidence we do have, which is published by the OECD, suggests that we have a bigger problem than in most advanced economies. And I think one of the reasons for this is we're not as good at managing transitions through the education system as they are in other countries. If you look at Germany, particularly, which is very good in this, careers advice starts earlier and is more systematic. And that means that pupils by the age of 14 do have a fairly clear idea of what they want to do. They've narrowed things down to a few options. In Australia and Canada, there is development of pre-apprenticeship training which helps young people later on make that decision about an occupation and begin that training outside the workplace. In France, apprenticeships appear to have been linked much more closely to a ladder of qualifications. So people can start on an apprenticeship and progress to much higher qualifications, possibly studying at a university, which has helped to make that path more attractive. I think there are particularly issues around vocational qualifications. For instance, some well-respected and established vocational options which have been around for a long time may become harder to take in future, particularly for pupils in schools. There are also issues around the foundation learning tier. This is replacing to some extent what's called entry to employment, which is a work-based scheme for young people, particularly for young people who are currently disengaged. And some people argue that E2E, as it's known, entry to employment, does have very good results, particularly as it's dealing with a difficult cohort, and it would be a shame to lose that kind of work-based provision.
And another big problem with current policy is the connection service in its guise as a one-stop shop. They have tended over the years to really skew most of their focus solely towards the disengaged, and not all NEETs are the disengaged.
Much careers advice is currently given by teachers who don't necessarily have a specific careers qualification. They don't necessarily have access to the most up-to-date information about qualification outcomes and careers paths. And I think we need to think about professionalising that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have teaching experience, and as we all know, teachers are busy enough. The idea that you could just bolt on you know, this huge responsibility of skilling up, getting knowledgeable about all the options, all the qualifications, aptitudes and interests, the wider context of labour market information, and just squeeze that on at the end of your day job and deliver it to, you know, 15, 16-year-olds is absurd. Another issue as well that Scott alluded to is around the professionalisation of the service. One of our interviewees, who was a career guidance advisor at college with 25 years experience, said that when he was qualified, it did take, you know, 2 years, and now it's a matter of being able to do perhaps an MVQ in 3 months. He feels that a lot of the practice and theory has been lost. Well, one of the most innovative things that we came across was some pilots in Wolverhampton, whereby they separated out 2 sets of Year 9s and Year 10s. So you're looking at your sort of 14-year-olds. And with the control group, who are quite highly motivated, they stayed on doing the traditional Key Stage 4 curriculum, so your sort of GCSEs, diploma age group. And in the more at-risk of disengaging group, they actually took them out of the national curriculum and gave them a year of doing short-term and longer-term taster courses around practical and vocational learning. So that included BTECs, it included some specific employability skills, interpersonal skills, confidence raising, team building, those kinds of things. At the end of the year, the control group stayed on, you know, continued in mainstream provision, and the tester group, who tried this innovative carousel of activities, also had to go back into full-term curriculum. But they found that the control group, even though they'd been originally more highly motivated, were less likely to stay on after 16 than the group that had originally been deemed at risk, but had had exposure to this wider set of experiences and qualifications. So that spoke quite strongly to us that if you were brave enough at 14 to give 14-year-olds that bigger option of activities, it could have very powerful effects in terms of retention and achievement further downstream.
Well, I think we need a clearer vocational pathway. At the moment, the position is slightly muddied, particularly by the diplomas. Some well-respected vocational qualifications which are taught in schools, like BTECs, RSA, City and Guilds qualifications. There's a danger they may be crowded out by diplomas. And in fact, those qualifications have good returns, particularly compared to MVQs when they're taught outside the workplace.
I mean, I think it's exciting. We could be on the verge of almost a paradigm shift. There is cross-party, cross-sector support for really making sure that the routes between academic and vocational are far more equitable, far more flexible. You know, we were advocating that even earlier, saying let's really robustly make sure that this flexibility between the pathways and between vocational and academic is possible earlier on at 14. Specifically with regard to NEETs, and by NEETs I would talk more specifically about the disengaged, people assuming that vocational is the option for them. They don't like academic, they just want to do vocational. I don't think that's true either. You know, as one interviewee said, you know, why do we assume a hoodie wants to be a bricklayer? A lot of the young people I work with have fantastic negotiation skills, entrepreneurial skills, but they don't even know, you know, what options are available to them that might make use of that.
There is a great danger, and we've seen this with the expansion of higher education, that we're creating a very stark division in our society between those who are qualified and those who aren't. And we need to do more to breach those divisions. But we live in a society where a lot of young people have very good support from their social networks, from their family. Many young people don't have access to that kind of support. And if we really want to reinvigorate social mobility in this country, we need to provide that kind of support.